May it please the court. Your Honors, opposing counsel, members of the jury, we asked you to consider a couple of questions while you heard testimony in today's trial. We asked you to consider who, what, why, and how. Who was involved in today's case? Jesse Duran and Sydney Park, two best friends, next door neighbors, members of families that were incredibly close, incredibly trusting of one another. Neither had any reason to assume that the other would intentionally harm one another. Now what? What happened on August 18th, 2010? Well, the defense has told you the truth, that an accident occurred. However, the plaintiff refuses to believe the truth. Instead, they're bringing before you a charge of intentional shooting. They are charging Hayden Duran on behalf of Jesse's actions with the intentional shooting of Sydney Park. In order to do that, they have to prove 4 elements. The first, that Hayden Duran had custody and control of Jesse Duran. The second, that Jesse committed an act of willful misconduct on August 18, 2010. The third is that Sydney Park suffered harm. And the fourth, the harm suffered by Sydney Park was a direct and proximate cause of Jesse's willful misconduct. Now, the first element, we are not contesting. Hayden Duran is in fact the mother of Jesse Duran and had custody and control of Jesse. The third, that Sydney Park suffered harm, we're also not contesting, and our deepest condolences go to the Park family for their loss. However, it's the second element, and by nature the fourth element, that we believe the plaintiff has not been able to prove that Jesse committed an act of willful misconduct. And this means that they have to show intent on Jesse's behalf, that Jesse had the intent to shoot Sydney Park on August 18, 2010. If they cannot prove that, they didn't, then the fourth element has also gone unproven. So what happened on August 18th? Well, 2 girls, 11 years old, finding that they would be left at home alone in the house, decided to do something that they were told not to. Do something naive. They took out the Park's gun. They took it out and they knew that they had access to it. They took it out and they decided to play with it. Acting out what they might have seen in video game or in TV and movies, they put a bullet in the gun. Proceeded to play with a loaded firearm. Now, members of the jury, you and I are adults and we know that playing with a loaded firearm is incredibly dangerous. But we know from Ash DeRosa's testimony today that inexperienced people don't know these sort of things. Jesse and Sydney were inexperienced with firearms. They didn't know firsthand the danger of their actions. Dr. DeRosa testified that accidents are far more likely to occur when a gun is available in the house, and even more likely to occur when the people that have access to it don't have experience. What is more likely? Now, the plaintiff, a different version of events, and in order to prove that, they brought Jules Sebastian to the stand. And remember their words, members of the jury, forensics don't lie. And people do. And that's important because the plaintiff didn't tell you the whole truth. Ms. Sebastian came to the stand and she told you that there were some fingerprints found on the gun. She told you that Jesse's fingerprints were found here, and they were found here. Remember, she also told you that Sydney's fingerprints were also found on the gun. And she testified that there were no usable fingerprints found on the handle. Jesse's fingerprints were not found on the handle. She testified that there were 0 fingerprints on the trigger. She tried to explain that it was because it was a small surface and it's too small to actually get fingerprints, but remember something else that she found fingerprints on. The spent shell casing. Very tiny item. About the same size as the trigger. And yet there were partial prints on that shell casing. but there was nothing on the trigger. No smudges, no partial prints, no unusable prints, nothing. Now, Ms. Sebastian also testified that fingerprints don't have timestamps. There's no such technology that can say when these fingerprints were put on there. All Ms. Sebastian could say with this evidence was that at some point Jesse touched the gun. She could not conclude how Jesse held the gun, when Jesse held the gun, or what Jesse did with the gun. Now, Ms. Sebastian also testified about GSR that she found. There was some on the right hand and a little less on the left hand, but she also testified that GSR is transferable and that Jesse's hands weren't even isolated until after she arrived at the scene, until after Jesse had interacted with police officers who were covered in GSR, until after she had interacted with other objects in the house, objects that Ms. Sebastian didn't find necessary to test for GSR. The evidence doesn't lie. The evidence shows it's far more likely that what Jesse said is true. Their evidence doesn't support their story. Now, why? Why would Jesse shoot her best friend? And in order to explain that, they brought Dr. Couples to the stand. But Dr. Couples lied. Dr. Couples said she interviewed past babysitters of Jesse, past teachers of Jesse. You heard Jesse say that those individuals weren't actually in her life. For all we know, members of the jury, those people don't exist. And we can't trust what Dr. Couples had to say, whose entire testimony was based off the interviews of people that have no bearing in today's trial. Furthermore, she explained her test, how Jesse needed to score a 12, a minimum of 12, in order to be classified as a psychopath. Members of the jury, she did score a 12. And one of those things that she scored Jesse on that led to that conclusion was a lack of empathy. She based this trait, which she scored as a 1, on Terry Chapin's testimony. Terry Chapin, who spent 1 minute with Jesse Duran. And in that minute, testifies that Jesse looked shocked. And that was the only explanation for Jesse's appearance, was that Jesse was in a state of shock. And that in that 1 minute, Jesse did begin to cry. Now how? How can the plaintiff bring a charge of intentional shooting when all the evidence that they and the defense have brought forward points to an accident? Members of the jury, you need to think about the evidence that's been provided to you and apply it to a preponderance of the evidence. That's the burden that they had to meet. And in this case, you need to think about whether Jesse intentionally shot her best friend. And despite what they had to say, that is a heavy burden. You need to think, is it more likely that 2 inexperienced children, home alone, played with a gun and it went off, causing a horrific accident? Or if their unlikely story is what happened, despite no evidence proving it? Return with the only verdict dictated by the evidence and find Ms. Duran not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Is there any rebuttal?